Hi, I'm Casey Evans, Senior Knowledge Exchange Manager in the Beef and Lamb team within AHDB. I'm joined today with Professor Jason Rowntree from Michigan State University, and we're going to be discussing, and he's going to be giving an overview of adaptive multi-paddock grazing systems. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, I've called it AMP grazing in the title,
All
but
right.
there's a lot of terminology
Sure.
out there that our farmers going to hear about, but it's the same or generally the same principles that's being used in a management technique. But do you want to just go through some of the other variations and
Yeah. So we've been doing this work. I've been doing it for 20 plus years, and
yeah,
there's always this aspect of definitions
yeah,
and, well, how do you differentiate between one grazing system and
yeah,
another, right? And so first of all, again, like that managed grazing is having livestock at a certain place
mm-hmm,
for a certain period of time
mm-hmm,
to accomplish a given purpose with a managed animal behavior.
yeah,
So, in one area, if I'm truly managing, I might be trying to improve yearling gain on a grass finisher. Another area, I might be trying to allow plants to even come to the point of being over rested,
mm-hmm,
but trample a lot of that down to try to improve organic matter or improve ground cover,
yeah,
right? So it's a management centric decision, right?
mm-hmm,
And so we have tons and tons of different terms that people use in their own context to
yeah,
define these things, right? For me, it's always been, and how I've learned a lot is through holistic plan grazing,
yeah,
which is effectively, using the management definition I said, but also having a defined grazing plan that
yeah.
allows you to plan for appropriate plant recovery.
Okay.
And that is a key, right? Is in terms of grazing to the point where we allow plants to recover.
Mm-hmm,
And so the terms that are out there you might hear are tall grass grazing, which
yeah,
allowing grasses to become mature, even over rested, or mob
yeah,
grazing using a very high amount of density on a very small piece of land, but often led for very long recovery periods.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And so it goes on and on. But the key in all of this is not to get lost in the definitions,
yeah,
but think about how are we managing to improve ecological function in our grasslands.
yeah. And can you just take us through some of those key principles and practices that would allow for us to really tap into those ecological functions
Sure,
really well?
absolutely. So uh, grazing is an important tool in a toolbox for
Yeah.
ecological function. Rest can be another tool.
Mm-hmm.
Not here, but in other landscapes, we might use fire or
Yeah.
other things, right? And so when it comes to tools in the toolbox, basically animal impact can be a
Mm-hmm.
big one. And effectively, what we try to do is to mimic nature as much as we can. And so if
Yeah.
you think about how native ruminants, whether it be a bison or a caribou or a wildebeest, traverse in a high amount of concentration because they're a prey
Yeah.
species. They come in, they graze, they like defecate, they stomp, they urinate, they really disrupt an area and they move
Mm-hmm.
on and they allow for those longer recovery periods, right? And they may not come back for a year
Yeah.
or year and a half or 2 years, right? And what we've been trying to do then is to mimic that,
Mm-hmm.
because I think those are the keys to lending us on how to improve our landscapes. Now, do we do that all the time? No, right? Part of this is social,
Yeah.
and it may be, oh, well, we've got uh, July 4th weekend, or we may have Thanksgiving or Memorial Day. Well, guess what? We're going to let the cows graze a bit in one paddock and enjoy our family time, right? And so it's not a religious, we have to do this
Yeah.
all the time
That
things.
flexibility is really key in
Absolutely. So it's
it.
social as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. One of the one of the things that we looked at were some of the improved forage growth and recovery. How does it contribute to that? How do these management systems continue to produce ME and protein despite leaving it that little bit longer and maybe
Yeah.
letting it
Well,
lignify a bit? Or how do you
it,
manage that?
it's always a balancing act,
Yeah.
number one, right? Like if I'm wanting to maximize a certain nutrient, I can, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of unintended potential consequences as well that
Yeah.
might evolve from that. And I mean, the fact is that, I mean, there's reams and reams of data. I go back to a lot of Fred Provenza's work on self-selection, that if provided an adequate sward
Yeah.
of considerably varying plants, cattle can self-select what they need. Cattle can graze to their nutrient requirements, right? We tend to put a high amount of management onto improving gain because we get paid on gain,
Yes.
and that can, but I think that longer term, if we do think about reducing inputs, if we think about meeting these climate pledges, we're going to have to do that with less fossil fuel, and by doing that, that means also less inputs, and therefore, beginning to think about how we manage in a way with a less input environment changes.
Yeah.
The benefit is that we're not we're not relying on that input we bring on the farm as much as we are about the biology of the system now. That can in turn enhance productivity. We've taken in out of our system for 15 years, and based on our prior data, we've seen very little changes in productivity. In fact, we've seen improvements.
And that ties back to your grass management. So it's
Yeah.
not a case that you have more land or more cows. It's about utilizing the resources that you have and getting the most out of them.
That's right. It's more of a naturally centric system versus one that I'm relying on more technology.
Yeah, fantastic. And some of the work that you've been involved with, have you seen how different grazing systems have affected soil carbon sequestration? Is there one that produces more or benefits the system more in that sense? Or
I don't know if we have enough information to really get there. I know that we're working on large trials right now that begin to answer that. You have pockets of research that suggests managing adaptively, and we've published some of that data over the years that have improved carbon. Often the problem is it's like doing climate change research, Katie. You can't have two Earths.
right.
So, well, is this real or not? Well, let's get two Earths and
Very
figure it out.
true.
And often when you start talking about the complexity of management, every system's different, and they tend to not be replicatable because they're very different. There's always differences in time and space management. But the fact is, I think that if we take a intense, continuous system in areas that have humidity, in areas that can grow fairly good grass, that those that are managing at a higher rate, they're moving more often, they're allowing for recovery, do tend to see improved ecological function.
Right.
You get out west where you have hardly any moisture, the differences may not be there because of the expansiveness of the area. And so it really depends on where you are, and I think that's just part of the complexity of managing all this.
A part of it, you touched on it. It's the grazing pressure that's applied in the trampling side of it. So, just take you a step back. If farmers were contemplating, I need to change my system, my objectives of these fields have changed, my goals have changed, my system is changing, the environment, the climate's changing. In response to that, how do they go about implementing these kind of grazing systems? What's the big difference from what we've talked about, some of the rotational grazing before, in entering at a certain cover, coming out of four centimeters residue? What's the big difference here in the infrastructure side and the management side of it?
Yeah, I would tend to just driving here. I mean, through here that, in terms of permanent fencing, looks pretty stable. So then you're constantly just looking at temporary fencing and electric and running water. And I think many of our systems probably already have that. I know when we are in the U.S., we tend to have less. But that's one part of it, right? And then for us, I walked into a system and I just gave up nitrogen cold turkey.
Yeah.
I just did it. And did I see some decreases in productivity? Absolutely. But then we also saw us coming out on the back end.
Yeah.
And how we did that is we made a decision of going and using more diversity of plants in our system. So we're introducing more types of legumes and more types of cool season grasses. We may have annuals that we might graze in some certain situations. I have a love affair with alfalfa. I'll be honest. It's a monoculture and it makes me happy because it's so productive and it can do well in a drought. But my data would tend to tell me that I should rely more on a highly diverse sward. So to me, that's the first step, right? Is that can we get into that concept where we're adding considerably more diversity into those systems? And then from there, building and just kind of working through on a farm to farm basis how much we can take. We typically only take half, leave half in our systems.
Right.
Where here, I think you guys are more aggressive and you might be pushing that 70% number. And so there's going to be nuance in how you manage it into those systems and the things that and how they evolve over time.
Yeah. When we're seeing now this change within the grazing systems within the industry, and we're getting out on more farm visits, and we're seeing this, these management systems of graze a third, leave a third, trample a third, and it is a mindset change to move into those fields. I know even for myself, from someone that comes from intensive dairy grazing background, to come back into these more regen systems now, and to really start seeing how the third that's left there, not for the livestock above ground, but for the livestock below ground. But it's hard not to look at it and see waste from a dry matter point of view. But how do we ensure the quality side of that coming through? How do we take confidence that leaving that third is benefiting the livestock, the soil, the whole system?
Great question. And it is. It's like I run into producers. You probably hate the way I feed hay because I bring in hay and then I unroll it and I let the cattle eat it, but then I also have them trample it and stomp it. And most people come and look and they're like, "You're wasting your hay." And
I'm not saying yes because I agree with that, but I do see more farmers here doing it.
I'm bringing $60 of NP and K onto my farm and I'm putting it back into the soil. So when you think about it more holistically, it's not just a gain standpoint, but you're also trying to feed microbes. You're trying to improve the resilience of that system through having greater ground cover. You begin to think about it differently, okay? Where the problem is that like you have to be committed to a certain degree, right? So it's like this. I can say I'm going to get healthy, okay? And I'm going to get healthy. So guess what? I'm going to eat really good, but I'm going to sit on my ass and I ain't going to exercise. Well, I'm probably not going to get the outcome I want. Or I am going to eat like crap and exercise. But either way, I'm probably not going to get my intended outcome, right? So it is a combination of the management of that animal, but also if we're going to be dedicated to improving ground and increasing resilience with less inputs and lowering our footprint, then it's got to be both, right? You've got to simultaneously embrace that management part and also what's happening at the ground and below ground. What's going to probably happen, though, is that there's going to be time where we are going to see reduction in productivity. I think that, and we've hit on it earlier, is that we do need to see farmers begin to be paid in a different way, where they're not just producing a commodity anymore. They're producing improved ecosystem services. And that allows for greater biodiversity and greater resilience and improved water quality and quantity. Everybody's clamoring for it, but I don't see anybody paying for it. And I think that in order to see these things change, that's got to be the main thing that we see adopted too, as well as how do we pay for it and who's going to pay for it.
Some of the research behind this, is that what you're seeing back in the US? Are you putting some of these measurable metrics behind to really get an idea of what those additional benefits are other than carbon? Because carbon's not the only measurement of good in these sort of systems.
Yeah, absolutely. We, in fact, we've got a large $19 million project now where we are measuring everything under the sun: water, biodiversity, carbon dioxide flux, soil carbon. I think I said that. All these things, right? Profitability, and every place is different. Every farmer and rancher is different. We all have different needs, and trying to identify then what types of management and how folks are managing and how these different levels of ecosystem services are changing. And it's an ongoing effort, right? And I feel like only in the last 5 years have we seen kind of this, thing get a little more mainstream, right? It's been, people have been doing it a long time, but there hasn't been as much attention. But I think with this aspect of climate and other things that we're seeing more of it. And so definitely there's a lot of great scientists across the world that are doing it as well.
From a farmer's point of view, what would you see are the barriers for them taking on these sorts of
It's income.
it's income.
Bottom line, right? Like I can't, if we're gonna say, oh well, let's get rid of 300 units of N,
Yeah.
you know, and there's a short term feeling that, well, I've just lost all my productivity.
Yeah.
We don't tend to think about all the money we're probably going to save on not buying that.
Yeah.
And profit equals income minus expense. A majority of the variation is explained by expense and not income. But the point, though, is that we can't, I think, in a shorter window, can't just see maintain productivity, right? It's got to, and that's why it's a lengthy journey in how this evolves. But I would think definitely that's going to be the main one. And unfortunately, we have to make decisions based on income, and often those type of decisions are more short term than long term.
That's brilliant, Jason. I think that's a really good point to kind of end it on here. And you've given a really great overview of the system. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us for our final part of our 3-part series of Roots to Resilience Module 1 interviews with Jason. Thank you.